is going to sort of drift away from what we were discussing. It's going to be on risk, resilience, and the new global order. Because the new global order is no longer defined by linear integration. It is shaped by strategic competition, energy transition, climate commitments, and technological bifurcations. In fact, risk today is multidimensional. It's financial, geopolitical, regulatory, and systemic. Some of these aspects we have already spoken about over these past 2 days. But resilience, therefore, becomes an organizing principle for governments and corporations alike, diversification or resilience. It requires institutions to anticipate shocks rather than merely responding to them. So from European economic policy calibration to emerging market fiscal realignment, global stability is being reconsidered in real time. And the conversation extends beyond markets to legitimacy, institutional endurance, and structural competitiveness. In fact, to conclude the day, one of the sessions is essentially going to be examining the risk that's involved, the resilience that's needed in a rapidly evolving global order. In fact, this is going to be a panel discussion, so may I please request the guests to kindly come up on stage. Coming up on stage is Dr. Fabian Zuleg. He's the Chief Executive and Chief Economist at European Policy Center. Mr. Zuleg, could you please come up on stage? A huge round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for the guests. Dr. Ajay Chibbar is an economist and former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations and former Assistant Administrator at the UNDP. Mr. Chibbar, a huge round of applause again, ladies and gentlemen. The right, Honorable Sir Vince Cable, he's the former Secretary of State for Business Innovation and Skills and President of the Board of Trade at the United Kingdom, and Professor Crispin Moratti, the founder and chief executive officer, Pareto Economics, inventor of the Global Power Index, is also part of the panel. In fact, going to be moderating this very, very interesting panel is Dr. Pier Stefano Saylor, partner consulting, EMA head of government and public sector and global lead partner, EU institutions at KPMG. A huge round of applause before we begin this session. Lots of interesting insights expected into trade, risk, and resilience and how to build businesses that are lasting. It's over to you, Mr. Stefano.
Okay, can you hear me? Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for having us. It's indeed a pleasure to be amongst an august audience in this eminent panel of global thought leaders. We are witnessing a structural shift from the post-Cold War liberal order, and the new era, as we call it, is defined by geopolitical fragmentation, where the dominance of a single, unipolar Western power seems to be transitioning to a more complex geometry of power, with regional pivots like the Indo-Pacific charting their own strategic priorities. So themes like protectionism, national security, sovereignty, or as someone called it last year, siloism, which is, I think, quite nice, are becoming increasingly popular. However, these are also points of greater risk of prioritizing resilience over efficiency and productivity. So, times like these demand that we have an open and effective dialogue to chart out an optimum way forward. And an open communication between governments, academia, businesses, citizens at large is the need of the hour. That said, I would like to ask our leaders present on the panel today what their perspectives and insights are, and to provide us with an effective way forward. So let me open up the dialogue with the question, what does it mean to be in a multipolar world today, and how do you see the emergence of a new world order? Let's start with you first, Dr. Zuleg.
Thank you very much for having me. And thank you very much for this question, which I think is a very important one, because we are seeing a world which is changing, but I would take the two questions separately. The question of multipolarity and the question of a new world order. Because multipolarity is a reality. We are seeing it all the time around us. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we arrive at a new world order. It is not an ordering principle. It is a description of a reality. And clearly the world is changing. But a new world order implies some form of organization. It implies some form of rules. And there we are actually seeing that, yes, the rules which we had needed to be replaced because they didn't reflect today's realities. They reflected the realities at the time they were created. Also because we have to say that unfortunately many of the rules haven't worked very well. They have not produced certainly the security which we wanted. But we might end up in a world without rules, in a world without guardrails, without any form of organization. And such a world is very dangerous. It's dangerous for everybody. It threatens security. It threatens prosperity. It threatens democracy. And I think that's very important, also speaking here. So I think we have to work together, and unfortunately, we now have to work without the US, at least under President Trump, to think about what kind of rules we might want to have for this world. They will be different. They will certainly reflect more of the powers which are there. But unfortunately, I think they will also not be as strong as we have seen in the past. Because if the biggest powers don't play by those rules, it's very hard to uphold them. And that's why it's really important that countries come together. Markani was talking about middle powers. Now, I'm not quite sure where I put the EU, where I put India, but certainly countries which have a shared interest in upholding a common order need to come together and define what these rules look like.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Dr. Chipper, what are your views on that question?
Well, thank you, and thank you very much to the GBS for inviting me here. So I think there's been a lot of Trump bashing of the breakdown of the old order, and it's probably valid. But, you know, people ask, why would a country like the United States, which created the old world order since the Second World War, which has benefited so much from this world order, why would it take a wrecking ball to this world order? And my answer is, you know, it seems quite illogical for the United States to wreck a world order in which it is on the top, it's still on the top at this time, although there is greater multipolarity. But the way I look at it is, if you read history, all empires, and we were living in an American empire, whether we liked the word or not, Pax Americana since the Second World War. It built all the institutions, the United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO, originally GATT. So why would a world power like that, which was ruling the roost, so to speak, break that world order? But if you go into history, you look at the decline of the Roman Empire, of the Mughal Empire, or the Ottoman Empire, they all started rotting from within, and that's how they collapsed. They did not collapse by an adversary taking over. So that's what's happening in the US. You've heard it in several panels here, how divisive that society has become, and how the elite is no longer able to govern effectively in the United States. So you see a breakdown of the world order because you see a breakdown in the leading power of that world order. I want to add one thing on China, because I think China has got a pass in all of this. In fact, people said Chinese must be laughing all the way to the bank. And, you know, there are very, very little Chinese representation here, but I do want to say that China has had a pretty big, important role. While they portray themselves as the defender of multilateralism, pretty important role in the breakdown of this world order, because It is Chinese who have played the institutions of this multipolar world very effectively to their advantage. If you recall, they controlled the WHO. When the COVID struck, they got a free pass. At the WTO, if you are ever in a business which has had to file a complaint against China in the appellate court of the WTO, you know that even if you win, you will lose, because the Chinese will find a way around you. In the IMF, they have had an underappreciated currency in China for a very long time. So even after the United States restricts imports from China last year, in 2025, China had a trade surplus of $1 trillion. So what I'm trying to say is that the breakdown of the world order is not just due to America, it is also because other players were not playing by the rules, or they were gaming the rules, so this world order had to collapse. Now, what will come in its place, we don't know. But I think, as Mark Carney said it in Davos, and I think what we heard also from the Prime Minister yesterday, countries like India must find more and more trade deals with countries that are not China. Because with the Chinese, it's heads I win, tails you will lose. So the trade deal with the EU becomes very important, with the UK, with Australia, with New Zealand, and now with America, even with a very fickle and a very unpredictable Trump. That deal still becomes important for India to help build resilience and maybe open up a dialogue with other countries to see what a new world order might emerge from this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And for your statement, Sir Vince, what is your
Thank
thought?
you also for the invite. I think I'd start the answer with a few numbers. Back in 1990, the so-called North, the developed countries, Europe, America, and Japan, had 60% of the world economy. It's now down to 40%, mainly because of China and India. And out of those numbers, you explain, I think, in large part, the MAGA movement in America and the populist movements in Europe, that the West has been in economic decline, relative decline. And if you forgive my doing a bit of hustling, I just published a book called The Eclipsing of the West that tries to explain this phenomenon. And the question now is where we go. And I sketch out some scenarios, some stories of the future. And the first is that we get to possibly what I call a global West, where the Western countries try to bring in emerging markets, crucially India, Indonesia, Saudi, others, to confront China, military and economically. And that's possible, but Trump is so disruptive, I don't think that's a sustainable story. But the second story is that you get this multipolar environment with different powers all doing their own thing, and lots of bilateral agreements. You know, India's been very skillful in exploiting this new environment, but for the world as a whole, it is potentially very damaging because international public goods, as we call them, agreements on trade rules, protecting the climate, the law of the seas, Antarctica, all these things, nobody is taking responsibility. And you would, in danger of, in a multipolar world, getting a degradation of these goods. So this is the time when the arguments for restoring a reformed multilateral system are crucial.
Thank you very much, Sir Vince. And finally, Professor Murati.
Thank you.
Your thoughts.
For a topic which is so important to business, I think our analysis is extremely shallow on this topic. And the reason I say that is multipolarity has always existed. I mean, we can't just look at the top 2 or 3 countries and assume they dominate the world. People in all parts of the world do business, they travel, they live their lives. So looking at it through that lens, I think, is a lens of power that only the powerful see. So what we do have isn't multipolarity, but we have something called segmented polarity. Now, I want that to be the dominant phrase that we use when describing the world. The difference between multipolarity and segmented polarity is that different countries have different levels of influence in different areas, right? So Saudi Arabia isn't a tech giant like the US is, right? Albania doesn't have as much oil as Saudi Arabia. Putting them all into the bucket of multipolarity is a very low resolution way of looking at the world. And such a low resolution doesn't help you as businesses, as policymakers, or as investors, because it makes you feel like you're smart. The world's very multipolar. So what do we do about it? What does next quarter look like? Oh, it's multipolar. And the conversation just stops there. So we have to have a lexicon or a way of speaking about the world, Pierre, that's based on the realities and looks at your contribution equally to other parts of the world. So that was multipolar. The New World Order is another one. Very rare in the world do we see a switch from an old world order to a new world order. That happens gradually. So the current world order, yes, post-World War II, we all know the story. Bretton Woods, IMF, World Bank, which has led to the development or the decline, the corruption, the degradation, whatever you want to call it, of the world. Mostly for good, but there has been some pockets of bad. So can anyone define or explain if you don't know what we're moving into, how do we know we're moving into it? Naturally, technology is something which is driving a lot of change, but things happen gradually until we wake up one day and feel this isn't what I experienced before, So my main takeaway from this is looking at the world through a lens which appreciates every country in the world's development standards, because very rarely do countries like Botswana take the stage when talking about the New World Order. It's always about the top 2, 3, maybe 4 countries that take the stage. But there's 194 countries plus in the world, and every single person in these countries has their ambitions, has their businesses to run. And if you only focus on multipolarity or segmented polarity and the New World Order, it doesn't really impact these guys and girls. So we have to use a different language, and we have to appreciate these concepts in a way that businesses and investors can use, not only academics in their armchairs.
Thank you very much. So for all your opening remarks. So let's dig a little bit deeper, and maybe, Dr. Chiba, we start with you, based from your rich experience in this area. Do you think we are entering in a phase where the global south becomes the main driver of growth, or does vulnerability still outweigh opportunity?
So I think in general, this last decade, this decade of disruption, you've seen a varied performance from the so-called global south. So when we talk about global south, we're talking about everybody who's not an advanced country, and that's a very diverse group of countries. There's at least 20 countries which are what we call fragile states, right? I mean, Afghanistan, Somalia. And they are doing even worse. I mean, there's a lot more conflict going on there. Then there's a group of countries like some of India's neighbors, like Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, which were at one time doing okay. I mean, Sri Lanka was certainly quite high up on the middle income ladder, and Bangladesh had this huge surge in textiles and was appearing to do quite well. But clearly with such high levels of corruption, very poor governance, and huge debt buildup during this decade when they were hit with COVID, the massive debt buildup has left these kinds of countries very, very vulnerable for the future. And we saw what happened in our own neighborhood in India, where all these governments literally collapsed with the Gen Z revolts, etc. So there's a swath of countries like that. But then, just to be more hopeful, there is another group of countries like India, like large parts of Southeast Asia, which have done well. They have kept catching up to the West. You know, they are converging in the sense that income levels on average are converging towards Western. We're still very far away, but, you know, the movement hasn't been in the right directions. So whether these countries will be enough to become the engine of growth for the future remains to be seen. And the Prime Minister yesterday promised that he would try his best to make India one of the big engines of the world economy for the future. But if countries like India, like Vietnam, like Indonesia, like others in Latin America, Mexico perhaps, and others, get their act together and move forward and grow rapidly, then, of course, the next centers of growth will come from this part of the global south. And I would put my bet on India becoming a very important such center, and will also help our neighborhood, because when the Sri Lankans realize that sitting next to them is a major engine of the global economy, when Bangladesh realizes, when Nepal realizes, they will all converge towards more and better economic relations with India. So a few big engines like that in the global south, like India, could pull along a lot others and also help drive, at least provide an extra engine to the global economy.
Thank you very much for these insights. Now, traveling from the global south to Europe, and hence to you, Dr. Zulek, let us understand these trends from a European perspective. What does resilience actually mean for Europe today? Is it centered around defense? Is it energy? Is it technology? Economic competitiveness, or maybe all of them? I just heard this morning in the news from the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa. He said 2025 was all about defense, 2026 is all about competitiveness and de-bureaucratization. Oh, what a difficult word. So what are your views?
Firstly, I think it's really important to recognize how much Europe is changing at the moment. I've worked on European policy for a long time, and I have never seen so much change in such a short time. And that is because Europe's world has changed fundamentally over the last years. To put it in a different way, Europe's holiday from history is over. We had 80 years where we didn't think very much about concepts like resilience. We didn't have to. Now we have to think about it on a daily basis, and no policy area is separable anymore. We cannot talk about resilience in one area. Certainly the most important resilience, which is going to be on the forefront of European minds, whatever happens in the White House, is going to be the threat from Russia. We have to be sure that we are resilient to the threat which is there, which is not only the war of aggression against Ukraine. It is a hybrid war which is being fought against the whole of Europe. It is also the announced aim of Russia to take back some of the countries which used to be in the Soviet Union. So we are going to have to prepare for a situation where we are resilient against the Russian threat, and that means that there will be a big focus on defense and security for years to come. But at the same time, there is also, as you rightly said, a big focus on competitiveness, on energy, of course also linked to this. We need to have energy systems which are resilient. We saw that Russian gas was weaponized when the war started, so we had to make sure that we find different sources. And now on top of all of that, we have the Trump II administration, which is a tremendous challenge for Europe. It means that we do not have the certainty of that alliance, which we have had for 80 years in Western Europe, for a little less in the East. And without that certainty, it means we have to do much, much more in our own responsibility. We have to take responsibility for defense and security, but we also need to have a much more common approach to areas such as competitiveness, to areas such as energy. These are tremendous changes. They are very, very difficult. They are also politically controversial, but they are happening. And what we're seeing now, I would hazard the guess that we will not see the results of this immediately. But in many ways, Europe has woken up and is now recognizing that gentle decline is not an option in the world we're living in.
Thank you very much for these insights. Conscious of time, but we still have two nice questions. Professor Multipolar, to you. Your assessments in the Global Power Index are truly insightful, and according to your latest findings, which regions or countries are emerging as future power centers? And maybe just very briefly, maybe you can explain to the audience what the Global Power Index is.
So I'm a data guy and a technology person, so we need to measure what we say. Okay, we need to measure what we say. So the way in which we do it, we've created something called the Global Power Index, which ranks all the countries in the world on 10 different metrics so you can forecast into the future. And we have 30 years worth of back data to back up our claims. India currently sits 6th in the world in the Global Power Index, number 6. 30 odd years ago is 24th, and it's had the highest rise faster than any other country in the world, which shows it. To get from 6th to 5th or to 4th is going to be the biggest challenge India has faced. Why? Because the last 30 years of development, you've made obvious reforms. Obvious reforms, and some people may be thinking, why has it taken so long to make these reforms? You know, we heard Prime Minister Modi here, and he seems like a leader who has a vision for the future, and he's been very much responsible for the growth that we've seen, and I can see the pride in the room yesterday of how much the people come around this message, which is needed. So one thing that you could do straight away in helping improve this perception, at least of India, is number one, stop using the word Global South. Okay? Because what Global South really means is the poor countries. And India is growing faster than that label can keep it captured. So we need to use different words to explain. Even emerging markets. I think these are investment words that we use to try to group people together. But if so many countries are grouped, that means there's not a good enough understanding, or there's not a lot of confidence in that region. So we just say, these are the other guys. Yeah? So to get out of the other guys group, you need to do what you're currently doing for the good and reform what you're not doing well. And we measure this, and we help governments, investors, and corporations make better plans to see this forward. So it's data-rich, data-heavy, and it can give you astonishing insights if used properly.
And which one is the emerging power? Can you say it?
So, sorry?
Which one would be an emerging power, according to your latest? You said you issued it just on Monday, right? The latest report.
Well, India is certainly an emerging power. Indonesia is another big one. But with these things, we're not seeing how they've developed, but we're seeing how they're going to go into the future. You know? So we can see the trend so far, but what they can do to actually impact their future is the X factor that you need to get right, especially now with competition being so fierce. So my Indian friends, make sure that this is top of your mind when it comes time to your businesses, because you decide how far India moves forward.
All right. Coming back to you, Sir Vince, and I think I have the joker question for you. Based on your experience, and you have held so many important government positions in your very long career. So having been through multiple economic crises and probably also non-economic crises, what lessons are governments still failing to learn from your point of view?
Well, my experience was trying to manage in the UK government the after effects of the great financial crisis. And I'm interested more generally in the question of how do you deal with what people call grey swans, not black swans, grey swans, known unknowns. Because we will get more financial crises, pandemics, oil price shocks. The question is how to deal with it. And I would stress three big lessons, right? One is fiscal discipline, debt management, and unfortunately, many countries are not prepared. The US has got fiscal indiscipline, which is why you already see a sliding dollar. Japan is not in great shape, and probably the most vulnerable are the UK and France. France has the Eurozone. And this matters because when you get a next shock, which may happen because of the pricking of the AI bubble, possibly, there will be a fall in government revenue and increased government spending. And those countries that don't have debt management won't cope with it. Secondly, banking discipline. You need liquidity, capital, separation of speculative banking from retail and business lending. Some governments have done it, but we already see the bankers saying, relax, 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 get rid of the regulation. Very dangerous, because if we get hit with a new financial shock, the banking system needs to be resilient. And third and finally, keeping the central bank independent, politically independent, because once you lose that, the markets will see the monetary system as simply a way of printing money. So the central bank has to remain politically independent. The US is worrying here. So some of the mainly developed economies, I'm afraid, are not in a good shape to face big new shocks. And maybe the countries that are best positioned now are some of the emerging markets, which have had terrible shocks in the past, but have learned to manage them.
Thank you very much. That was very clear and very precise. And I think the sign that we heard is something like the time is up, unfortunately. I guess it is. So just summarizing very quickly from the key takeaways, starting with you, Dr. Zulek, you said, we are in a multipolar world for long, but not that you don't see the new order yet. And resilience is a new concept to the EU, and it has to be resilient in all of its areas. That's what I've understood. And so thank you for these insights. Dr. Chipper, I learned from you that the superpowers will be rotten from inside, which is quite a, pessimistic view maybe for some of us in the room. And that China plays a big part in that, and that the global south is very diverse, so you don't put them all in one pot. There's still some very vulnerable parts of that and some emerging and doing quite well, like India or Vietnam and others. Sir Vince, you brought up the concept of the global West, quite interesting, and the gray swans, didn't hear about them. And you talked about fiscal discipline, banking discipline, and in the independent central banks that you need to have to be resilient and ready for the next crisis. And from you, Professor Moratti, I understood the concept of segmented polarity, so not multipolarity, and that we will be gradually going to a new order. And emerging powers are, according to your research and your index, India, amongst others, and Indonesia. Thank you for having us. Thank you to the audience for having us, and to all the panelists for your great insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's been an honor to have you with us.